all of you. We are now live on Facebook. Maraming salamat po for joining us today. Welcome to Leaders for Excellence in Public Service or LEAP Mayor's Fellowship Program. This Saturday po is our Module 6. Naka-anim na webinars na po tayo starting June. And 2 weeks ago, we had DOH Yusek Berhere who shared with us how we can better work together as LGUs and the national government agencies. And for this Saturday, since malapit na po ang bare months at alam natin na parating na ang tag-ulan and of course ang mga seasonal diseases, mas mahirap ngayon because we are in a time of pandemic. Kaya today, we will be having speakers who will share with us how we can prepare for natural disaster and seasonal diseases. So hindi ko na po patatagalin pa dahil kanina pa sila ready and excited to meet our mayors. So let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker holds a Master in Public Health at the University of the Philippines and previously held a position in the Department of Health, where she had been involved in the development of several training courses and reference materials in health emergency management that are being used both locally and internationally. Likewise, she was also one of those who had established the postgraduate course on Master in Health Emergency Management as a collaborative partnership between Bicol University and the DOH. At present, she is the Director for the Capacity Building and Training Service of the Office of Civil Defense. She spearheads the development of standards on disaster risk reduction and management training courses and institutionalization of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Institute. In addition, she pioneers the advocacy initiatives on earthquake preparedness. Finally, being a DRRM worker, she believes that an efficient and effective response is paramount for disaster preparedness. To talk about disaster risk reduction and management amid COVID-19, please welcome Director Susan Huangco.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mag-screen share lang po ako. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be discussing about disaster risk reduction and management amid what we are having now, the COVID-19 pandemic. So the outline of the presentation, I will be discussing the disaster risk reduction and management framework of the Philippines, the DRRM in the new normal, the localization of the disaster risk reduction and management or DRRM, and the last slide will be discussing the summary of the entire presentation. So let us go with the first topic or with the first on the outline, that's the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Framework. Now, according to the Republic Act 10121, the NDRMC or through the Office of Civil Defense should be developing the NDRM framework. This is our NDRM framework, wherein our ultimate goal is to have a safer, adaptive, and resilient Filipino communities towards sustainable development. Now, this can be achieved by having or identifying the risk factors. So identifying the risk factors that focuses on hazards, exposures, vulnerabilities, and capacity. And basically, this risk assessment. Now, once we have done our risk assessment we are on equal footing. Parehas lang po yung binibigay natin sa kanya. But with the NDRM framework, what we wanted to do is mas focus tayo on prevention and mitigation. And then from prevention and mitigation, and then saka po natin titingnan yung preparedness, response, rehabilitation, recovery. Because what we wanted is for the hazard, bago man siya dumating sa atin before it becomes an emergency at maaari na wag na maging disaster. We have already done the prevention and mitigation and preparedness for all of this. So now, when we talk about disaster risk reduction management framework, we're talking of the hazards in the Philippines. And what are three hazards in the Philippines. Meron po tayong natural, ito po yung sinasabi po natin. We have the earthquake, landslide, ito po yung volcanic eruption. We have that because we have so many active volcano. We have tsunami, pag nagkaroon po ng lindol na kung saan hindi po siya tectonic, kasi sa dagat, we'll be having this tsunami. We also have storm surge. Of course, sino makakalimot sa Ondoy, ito yung ating flooding. And hindi man po to natural disaster, but this is a common hazard na dumarating po sa atin, that is fire. So these are the common natural hazards na meron po tayo dito sa Pilipinas because we are situated in the Pacific Ring of Fire and doon po sa ating typhoon belt. Now, ngayon po, sa ngayon, nagkaroon tayo ng the coming of the coronavirus. The Philippines confirmed the first coronavirus on January 30. Ito po yung 38-year-old female Chinese national. But then pagdating po ng March 7, the DOH declared the first local transmission of COVID-19. So ito po yung mga petsa na yon. And then now, we already have the COVID-19 here in the Philippines. Ito po yung pandemic. And as of yesterday, we have already a total of 114,519 cases ng ating pong coronavirus para dito. And ito po na yung sumunod doon. Sabi nga po, dun sa mga balita, coronavirus will always be here, but meron naman pong ginagawa na government plan when it comes to this coronavirus management. Now, let us now look into this. The COVID-19 po does not stop other emergencies from happening. Hindi man porket may COVID-19, hindi na mangyayari yung hazards. Now, this is our situation now. We have COVID-19 in our environment. We have COVID-19 dito po sa atin ngayon dito sa buong, not only in the Philippines, but for the entire world. But with the COVID-19 or the pandemic now, paano kung dumating pa po itong mga hazards nito? What if there is a combination of this COVID-19 and all of these natural hazards? And totoo naman po siya nangyari because just recently, nagkaroon po ng lindol sa Masbate. It's a 6.6 magnitude earthquake that happened in Masbate. And also, na kung nabalitaan po natin, nagkaroon ng flash flood sa Santa Rosa, Laguna, wherein wala naman pong bagyo, just because malakas lang po yung ulan. So, these are happening now. COVID-19 is here, the hazards are here, emergencies are coming, but sana wag na madagdagan for this emergency to turn into disaster. Now, ito na po, and is what we call now as our new normal. All of these hazards that the Philippines are having together with the COVID-19. And we have to live into this new normal. Now, let us go back again dito po sa ating NDRM framework. So, with this NDRM framework na sinasabi po natin na to, sabi nga natin kanina, there are 4 thematic pillars that we're looking into. One is we have the disaster prevention and mitigation. We have disaster preparedness. We have disaster response, and we have disaster rehabilitation and recovery. Now, isa-isahin po natin itong ating thematic pillar na to. And let us take into consideration ano ba yung gagawin natin for each of these disaster pillars. Now, with the coming of COVID, we have the National Action Plan for COVID-19. But before the National Action Plan for COVID-19 was developed, we already had the Office of Civil Defense, together with the other members of the Council and the Department of Health, had developed the Response Cluster Action Plan, taking into consideration the emerging and infectious diseases manual that the Department of Health has developed, and in-integrate po natin dito the response cluster of the NDRMC. That's why we have developed the Response Cluster Action Plan. Now, nung pagkatapos po nito, nagkaroon po ng National Action Plan Phase 1. Ito po yung in-implement natin noon ng National Action Plan Phase 1. Now, we are now on the National Action Plan Phase 2, wherein the focus of this NAP Phase 2 framework is localization. So this is a people-centered, nationally supported, but locally led framework wherein the objectives that we wanted to attain in order for us to achieve our end state towards the new normal, which are the COVID-19 virus contained and managed, a well-informed citizenry, an adaptive resilient community, and a recovered economy that we have. Ito po yung National Action Plan Phase 2 framework. But again, this is towards localization and public and private partnership. So this yung national government agency will now already be in the support. So this will now be locally led and public-private partnership. So this is not phase 2 framework. Now, aside from this, kasama rin po natin, which ito yung lagi natin ginagawa, ito ating laging tinitingnan, is the minimum public health standard, which was released by the Department of Health through its Administrative Order 0015, wherein it has 4 objectives: to increase physical and mental resilience, reduction of transmission, to reduce the contact, and to reduce the duration of infection. That's why what we wanted is, even whenever we have the infection for COVID, recovery, makuha po natin agad yung the fastest recovery of the infected population. So this is the minimum public health standard. Now, if we're going to apply all of this, then ito po yung gusto natin mangyari. A balance between public health and economy. Hindi pwedeng tingin lang tayo agad public health, puro tayo quarantine, babagsak yung ekonomiya. Hindi naman pwedeng puro ekonomiya. Marami naman pong magiging infected with COVID-19. So this is what we wanted to pursue. A balance between public health and economy, wherein ito po yung ating tinitingnan, magkaroon ng kalusugan upang makapaghanap buhay yung mga yan. Because yun ang sinasabi nila, kailangan sila maghanap buhay. At kung meron na pong hanap buhay, then patuloy na mabubuhay po ang ating mga tao. Then there will be economy. So this is basically the balance between public health and economy. Now, how are we, now, that is the first one that we have now. So ito po yung una natin ginawa. It's a disaster, looked into the disaster risk reduction management framework of the Philippines through our RA 10121 and our action plan with regards to COVID-19. Now, punta na po tayo dito sa the topic. It's DRRM in the new normal. Now, sabi natin, itong tatlong ito yung kailangan natin. It's the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Framework, the National Action Plan, and the minimum health standards. Now, when we're talking about the new normal, what we wanted is to have an integration all of these three. So, paano natin siya may integrate in order for us to achieve an entire management on DRRM with COVID-19 and at the present situation? At nang sabihan, this now will be our NDRM in the new normal. Nabalikan natin yung kanina. Yung sabi natin na 4 thematic pillar based on the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Framework. Isa-isahin po natin ito on how are we going to integrate the 3 framework, the National Action Plan, and also the minimum health standard. Let us first go with the disaster prevention and mitigation. Disaster prevention mitigation per se is avoiding the hazards and mitigating the potential impact. On the NDRM framework, ito po yung focus niya. It's early warning system, forecasting and monitoring, hazard and risk mapping, and structural and non-structural intervention. Now, if we're going to integrate the framework and then the NAP phase 2 and also the minimum health standards, this will now be the NDRM in the new normal. 1, we should be doing the revision of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Plan, the local DRM plan, the prevention and mitigation plan, and other guidelines and protocols wherein dapat po nakapasok dito the COVID-19 or the health hazard or the biological hazard that we have now. So dapat nandun din po na isama din po on the revision or the review of this NDRMP and the LDRMP and all the other prevention and mitigation guidelines and protocols. Next is for us to maximize the use of digital, distance-based, and paperless early warning systems. We should now go into digitalization. We should lessen the physical contact of people. Ito yung reaching more people para nang sa gayon, mas makuha nila yung early warning system. They will be more informed when it comes to hazards, emergencies, and disasters. Also, to incorporate epidemics or disease outbreaks as part of disaster risk. If you can still remember, we need to do the risk assessment. Now, when we do the risk assessment, when we're looking the hazard, what we should be doing is to identify or also what will be the vulnerability, the exposure when it comes to epidemics and disease outbreaks. This should now be part of risk assessment, not just the natural hazards of the human-induced hazards. And of course, whatever we have now when it comes to COVID-19, we should use the current COVID-19 as benchmark for developing our plans with regards to NDRM framework. So that's disaster prevention and mitigation. And that the last but not the least, ito po yung contact tracing application. Not only the application on contact tracing, but also with all the other programs or projects that we'll be having in the RM. As I've said before, we should go now into digitalization. Now, let us go with disaster preparedness at establishing and strengthening capacity. On the NDR framework, ito po yung kanyang focus noon. It's planning, prepositioning, stockpiling, organizing responders, training, drills, and exercises. With the new NDRM in the new normal, ito po ngayon gusto natin mangyari. Of course, again, we have the preparedness plan, but we need to do the revision. We need to do the review. So we need to revise the preparedness plan. And of course, we need to develop the public service continuity plan para po doon sa mga local government units na hindi pa nakakagawa ng public service continuity plan. And for those who already have their public service continuity plan, to revise it. Revise it, focusing not only on the natural disasters, but also taking into consideration how are we going to function or do or continue our mission essential function with COVID-19 now. Kung naalala po natin with the occurrence of COVID-19, tumigil ang ating mga serbisyo. Not necessarily tumigil ng buo, but nagkaroon po ng hamper in the services. So ito yung gusto natin mangyari. With public service continuity plan, the mission essential function should always continue. And of course, the revision of other guidelines and protocols with regards to preparedness. This is the second thing that we should be taking into consideration. Hindi na po tayo dapat basta lang health IEC campaign. Hindi lang po tayo dapat basta advocacy campaign. What we should be focusing is to conduct of risk and crisis communication. We should communicate first to the people. Not only communicating the risk to the people, but risk and crisis communication is also telling them this is what you should be doing. This is the behavior change that all of you should be practicing. So ito po yung risk and crisis communication. Then, of course, dahil kailangan po natin lesser ang ating physical setup. There should be physical distancing. There should be the use of blended methodologies for capacity building. So, kung maaari, more on the online, kung hindi talaga kailangan, especially on the skills training, then you'll be using the blended learning, but following the minimum health standards of the Department of Health. The inclusion of PPEs and other medical supplies and equipment in prepositioning and stockpiling. Dapat po, kasama na ito palagi ngayon. Kasama na palagi ang ating PPEs pag nagagawa po tayo ng prepositioning and stockpiling. Including, of course, PPEs, siyempre kasama dyan yung ating face mask and everything. Of course, hindi lang po yung PPE na ginagamit ng NAMNAYOS, kundi kasama po yun sa PPE. Strengthen isolation and treatment capacities. We now have our quarantine facilities. We now have our isolation centers, but we need to still strengthen these facilities that we have. Not only the facilities, but even the capacities. And when we talk of capacities, we're talking about the entire gamut of on capacity. That's the information management, the human resources, and even the family. Next is the institutionalized contact tracing system. Ito po yung pinaka-importante sa lahat. The other countries are very good when it comes to their management in COVID-19. It is because they have a powerful contact tracing system. So this one should be institutionalized. And of course, capacity building for our responders. So talking about response, ito po yung framework, and this is what we should be doing. Revision of response plan and the contingency plan and other guidelines and protocols to institutionalize the minimum health standards in all our response operation and protocols, to strengthen the safety of responders, strengthen quarantine facilities and testing center, the establishment of COVID-19 sensitive evacuation center. Ano po ba yung COVID-19 sensitive evacuation center? Dito po kailangan mandon pa rin yung physical distancing. Mamaya po pakita ko sa inyo ano yung ginawa. Nakita ko na naginawa din sa ibang bansa on the evacuation center. And of course, when we're doing the PIDRA and the ARDINA, it should be COVID-19 sensitive. The tools and procedures when we do the pre-disaster risk assessment and the rapid damage and needs assessment, this should be COVID-19 sensitive. And the inclusion of disinfecting and personal protective supplies when we're giving our relief packages to our people. Now let us talk about disaster rehabilitation recovery. Of course, this is the PDNA. So ano bang dapat natin gawin dito? One, we have to revise our rehabilitation recovery plan and other guidelines and protocols related to rehabilitation recovery. A COVID-19 sensitive PDNA tool. So yung pong ating dapat post-disaster needs assessment tools and procedures, dapat COVID sensitive na po natin ito ngayon. The incorporation of health factors as part of disaster rehabilitation recovery, provide recovery measures for local economy. Because this is what we wanted, as what I've said before, a balance between public health and economy. And alam po naman natin kung paano na po kababa yung ating economy yun. So we should have the provision for recovery measures for local economy. And ito po yung isa, designing a COVID-19 sensitive house model. Because let us admit it, hindi po lahat kakayanin in our quarantine facilities. Now, ano ba yung ginagawa ng Office Stable Defense Initiative towards the new normal? So, ang NDRMC po ay ginagawa po na to continue the regular operation for disasters. But we're doing our preparedness measures with regards to COVID-19 para po dito. And habang patuloy yung response to COVID-19. So, ito po yung unang ginawa namin. Lahat po ng opisina sa Office of Civil Defense, meron na po siyang division. Kung mapansin po niyo na dito sa kaliwa, ito po yung National Disaster Reduction Management Operation Center. So pagka po mag-meeting na, separated na po yung lahat ng mga tao na nandun. Meron na po dong yung partition na clear, even with all our tables, nakalagay na po yun doon. This aside from yung the usual na sinasabi natin that there should be the hand washing area para doon bago pumasok and everything. Lahat po yan in place in the Office of Civil Defense. But this is the additional thing that we have put into place sa aming po office. Of course, sabi ko nga kanina, yung mga revisions sa mga plano na ito. So with the revisions of plans and policies and guidelines, what we have done is we have already issued NDRMC Memo number 57 for the review and updating of Public Service Continuity Plan and the Contingency Plan. So this had been issued noon pong June 15, 2020 for all national government agencies, lahat po ng members of the council, including the local government. We also have our NDRMC Memo number 54, the rainy season preparedness measure amid COVID-19. So nakalagay po dito ano yung dapat gawin ng taong bayan ngayon pong darating na ang rainy season. So this was issued May 28, 2020. Ito po yung ginagawa na this is now being developed and nagkakaroon po ng mga workshops and consultations for all of this. One is establishment and management of COVID-19 sensitive evacuation center. We have already established or organized the technical working group and ginagawa na po nila dito. What will now be the design? How are you going to manage the evacuation centers and how are you going to do the camp management with COVID-19 in our needs? So ito po yun. Another one is the interim guidelines and the conduct of the NSED during a public health emergency due to COVID-19. We all knew that we conduct NSED every quarter on the first day of the second month of the quarter. We do NSED. In fact, baka po yung mga local government units ninyo ay siya na po, isa po sila sa mga ating mga naging host noon o sila po yung ceremonial venue noon. Now we'll still be doing the NSED, but my quiz. So, hindi na po tayong the usual katulad noon na gagawin natin na may after the duck cover and hold mag-evacuation and then magpapakita po tayo at isi-test natin paano ba ginagawa yung response operation. It still will be done, but there will already be a twist for this. We'll still be doing the duck cover and hold. However, hindi na po yung physical contact when it comes to the simulation exercises. The simulation exercises will now be a tabletop exercise and the functional exercise. So ito po yung nakalagay dito sa ating guidelines in the conduct of COVID-19, of NSED rather. Of course, sabi natin, tayo po ay nasa new normal now. We'll be going into digitalization. We're now doing the DRM training courses in the new normal. So binabago na po natin all the DRM training, the teaching learning methodologies, binabago po natin ito. And soon, pagka po nagawa na natin to, we will now be conducting the training that we have. Because what we wanted is to have an informed and learned DRM practitioner. So online na po yung ating mga basic DRM and of course blended learning is a combination of face-to-face learning and online learning. So ito po yung gagawin natin in order for us to capacitate for experience. Another one is we have our webinars. We have just conducted the Filipino Society and Culture amidst the COVID-19 webinar, the disaster risk governance on the new normal. How are we going to use the funding when it comes to disaster preparedness amidst the COVID-19. And ito po yung soon on August 28th, we're inviting everyone. And of course, your DRM practitioner, if you have people with disabilities, we wanted to listen to the unheard voice of the persons with the disabilities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ito yung mga kailangan nila. We need to include this persons with disabilities in our planning. And we wanted to hear from them para na sa rin makuha tayo ng magandang plano para dito. So this is the fourth webinar that we'll be doing. That's on August 28, 2020. Now, of course, we have also the DRM knowledge wherein nandito po lahat ng ating pong IEC materials, learning materials when it comes to DRM. Just have to go to OCD or NDRMC website and visit our DRM Knowledge Center. Nandun po lahat. This is the data bank, this is the library, the digital library of all the references materials on DRM Knowledge Center, of all DRM IEC material or learning materials, including the policies po on DRR. Of course, meron po kaming Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube para po sa gayon. Dito po natin binibigay what are the different IEC materials. We just have conducted the Resilience Challenge dito mong July because July is our disaster resilience month. So we conducted the Resilience Challenge 2020. And ating pong NSED, sabi ko nga kanina, this will be done this September para po sa ating third quarter. Now, tapos na po natin yung DRM, the new normal. Ito na yung mas importante po sa lahat ng ating mga mayor. It's the localization of DRM. How are we going to localize everything that we have discussed? So, ito po yung sabi natin when we wanted to localize DRM. The LGUs will be the front line for resilience. So, paano po pang gagawin natin dito? First is to strengthen disaster risk governance. There should be a risk-informed and evidence-based decision-making, a people-centered DRM programs and activities, and the support to sustainable development agenda and climate action. So ito po yung ginagawa natin in order for the local government units para na again ma-establish yung ating mga DRM programs and projects at the local government units. Now, when we talk about governance, risk governance, ito po yung sinasabi natin para dito. When we talk, because ito yung dapat mangyari ngayon with the COVID-19 situation that we have, it's disaster risk governance. And how are we going to bridge this disaster risk governance? First, there should be the ownership. When we talk about disaster risk governance, we're talking only about the government. We're talking about the government, we're talking about the private sector, we're talking about the CSOs, the national and the non-government organization. We're talking about the academe, and of course, we're talking about the general public. The ownership of all of these people will lead to, para po dito, a multi-stakeholder engagement, a shared vision and responsibilities, transparency and accountability, and the dialogue with feedback. Kasi po may ownership ng lahat ng ito. So dahil may ownership sila dito, pagdating ngayon dito sa ginagawa natin engagement, merong sharing ng everything. That's what we call, nung una kasi kanya-kanya. What we wanted is a co-ownership. Lahat tayo magtutulong-tulong. That's disaster risk governance. It's not just the government alone, not just the CSO alone, but the combination of all of these entities together with our general public. And once we have the co-ownership for this, then we'll now be a transformed government. It's our co-creation. The institutionalization of DRR as sustainable development, the empowered disciplined citizenry, because the general public had been involved with planning and implementation of the plans that we have. And through this, we'll be having our resilience. So this will now be our new normal governance framework that we should be implementing with this COVID-19. And ito po yung nakuha po namin ng virtual town hall na kung saan nagkaroon po tayo ng webinar dito. Ito po yung naging output natin. Now, tingnan natin ngayon, how are we going to localize all of this? Isa-isahin po natin ulit. With disaster prevention and mitigation, ito pong violet na to, ito yung sinabi natin na dapat gawin in the NDR and normal. Mahirap sasabihin natin, sige, gagawin lahat ng local government units because it's localization. But the question is, kaya, lahat ba to dapat sa LGU? Of course, hindi naman po. I've identified some. Pwedeng madagdagan, pwedeng gawin lahat, pwedeng, kung kaya ng local government units, sige lang, mas maganda because if you'll be implementing risk governance, mas maganda. So ano yan? First and foremost is the review and enhancement of the local disaster risk reduction management plan. Ito sana yung mauna when we talk about disaster prevention and mitigation. Because if the LDRMP has been reviewed and napasok na po dito yung ating COVID-19 situation para dito, then we will now be able to make a new LDRMP, a new local disaster risk reduction management plan that is aligned to the present situation, which is our new one. Now, with disaster preparedness, ito yung sana mangyari. The development of the public service continuity plan, a COVID-19 sensitive workplace, more active risk communication, and the review of the preposition supplies and equipment that we have now in all our localities. For ito po yung isa pa sana na hinihiling po natin, a go bag for every member of the family. Ito po yung mga nakalagay doon. And if every family, kung hindi kaya ng every member of the family, kahit yung para sa buong pamilya. Sabi nga natin, di ba, sa disaster risk governance, there should be the inclusion of the general public. So, if they will be aware, bakit ba kailangan ng go bag na to? Kasi kung nagkakaroon po tayo ng disaster, we should always take into consideration yung yo-yo. We will be on our own. And according po doon po sa nakita po natin na assessment, yung gagalaw po yung West Valley Fault in Metro Manila, bago po makaresponde ang ating mga responders, it will take 3 days. So 3 days yung yo-yo na yung mangyayari. Kaya po kailangan natin yung go bag. Kaya po, kung meron silang go bag, then malilesen po ang burden ng ating local facilities. Now let's proceed with response. The inclusion of COVID-19 data, reference for TIDRA, malapit na dumarating na po ang tag-ulan, we will be conducting our pre-disaster and risk assessment, COVID-19 data that we have in our respective local government units should be used as a reference when we conduct our TIDRA. The active implementation of preemptive evacuation, bakit po dito? Kasi po, kung hindi preemptive evacuation na mangyayari, doon agad tayo sa response na evacuation wherein nandito na yung emergency and disaster, hindi na po natin masusunod yung ginagawa po natin na minimum health standard. That's why preemptive evacuation po, sana mas maging active yung implementation para dito. Again, with risk governance, kasama po dito dapat ng publiko. They should be able to know the reason bakit may preemptive evacuation. Then the implementation of minimum health standards in our camp management, within our evacuation centers. Let us now proceed. Ito po yung sinasabi ko po kanina ng evacuation center. On the upper left, na nakikita po natin, ito yung evacuation center natin. Pero nagkaroon po tayo ng upgrading. So ito po yung mga nakita natin in the recent, yung previous na nakita natin. Nagbili ang ating mga local government units ng mga tents na ito. Pero kung dikit-dikit yung mga tents, paano yung minimum health standards? Ito po yung nakita ko yung nandito sa kanan. Nakita ko po to. This is an evacuation center in Japan. Kita po natin wala silang tents. But when it comes to the physical distancing para sa bawat pamilya, meron po silang nailagay para dito. So, mas kayo po ang mas nakakaagam kung paano po natin magagawa ang lahat ng po together with you. And pagka po nailabas na po natin yung ating memo on the designs and the management of evacuation center, then that can help po sa ating bawat local citizens. Now, let us proceed with disaster rehabilitation recovery. Sabi nga natin, a balance between public health and economy. And sino po yung pinakamaraming apektado po yung dito? It's our innocence. A recovery program for our innocence. Yun po sana. So, that's it. We had the localization of the RM. Let us now proceed with the last one. That's the summary. As a summary, COVID-19 as a health hazard should always be included in the conduct of risk assessment. Ito po yung sinabi natin. Hindi na pwedeng natural hazard lang, human-induced hazard lang, biological, hindi lang pwedeng lahat ng yan kasama ang health hazard pagdating po dito sa ating risk assessment nito. The RM, the new normal, should always take into consideration the prevention and mitigation of the hazard COVID-19. Governance in the RM is a partnership between the government, the private sector, the academe, and the people. The people, our community, our people. The local government unit is the front line when we're talking about resilience. And the RM starts in the hands of the people. Each individual's behavior change matters. Kasi po, sa bawat individual na nandito, sa kanila po magsisimula ang resiliency ng ating bansa. So, I think that is all for our disaster risk reduction and management with COVID-19 pandemic. Maraming salamat po sa inyo lahat. You can always email us and please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Salamat po. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much po, Director Susan. Totoo po na LGUs are really at the front line in resilience. And hindi lang po distance learning o pagmamanage ng COVID cases ang iniintindi ng mayors natin ngayon. But also now na palapit na ang rainy season, we're all preparing for natural disasters. So now po, we move on to the open forum part of our program. Sa ating LEAP mayors, you know the drill. If you have any question, you may chat or use the raise hand option and we will unmute you so you can ask your question. But first, meron po tayong tatlong na-receive na questions earlier and we hope that Director Susan can answer these po.
Sige po,
Sinend po
hanggat
ito,
kaya.
sinend po ito upon the registration. So, first question po, sa mga climate vulnerable LGUs, may national guidelines na po ba or protocol for evacuation, especially kung PUIs or COVID patients ang kailangang i-evacuate?
Ito po yung ginagawa po natin ngayon para po dito sa evacuation. Ito po yung sinabi ko po kanina na ongoing po yung develop po natin. But pwede po natin sundin yung pa rin pong atin pong yung minimum health standard. Yung sinabi ko po kanina na in-issue po ng Department of Health is po yung kanilang administrative order. It's a very, what we call this, it's a very comprehensive minimum health standards na kung saan makikita natin doon kung paano yung ating pong gagawin para na sige ma-meet natin yung ating prevention and mitigation for COVID-19. But we are in the process of developing this together with our Department of Social Welfare and Development. Sila po yung ating pong vice chair pagdating po sa response. So, yun po. Basta po na-issue, tapos na po yung memorandum, will be issuing it po and ibibigay, ikakapay po agad-agad po ng Office of Civil Defense and the Department of Interior and Local Government. Salamat.
Thank you very much po. For our next question po, I think this is related doon po sa news. In the past week, an oarfish was found on the shore of Misamis Oriental and Agusan del Norte. It is said that this can be a sign of an earthquake. Is this true po ba? And if yes, is it possible to know what is the scope of the earthquake?
Mukha pong tinanong na po nung noon pa, even before the Masbate earthquake, ito po yung nagkaroon ng earthquake. I just cannot remember kung saan yung the Visayas. Ito po yung malakas. Tinanong po si Yusuf Tulidum tungkol doon, na kung saan kasi madaming mga lumabas na gano'n. Sinabi po ni Yusuf Tulidum na there's no relation to that. Yun po yung sinabi po niya para po doon. Thank you.
Thank you po. And lastly po, from our list of questions, hindi po lahat ng LGUs ay may capacity to digitize warning systems. What is the most effective way to go about it kung wala pong kakayahan ang LGU?
Yes po, totoo po yan. Ang ating pong department, ang DICT po, ay tinalaga ng ating pong gobyerno na siya pong gagawa po nito. So, there's already with the IATF, ito po yung National Action Plan Phase 2. Meron po tayong tinatawag na SPG governance. Ito yung sub-task governance. Wherein isa po sa mga activities na nakalagay po dito is ito nga po, ng itong ating digitalization. At itinalaga po dito ang DICT parang siya yung gumawa para dito. But nevertheless, ang NDRMC po sa ngayon ay ginagawa na rin po namin. Ito po yung kung nadidinig ninyo, ito yung mga warning signal na kung saan para dito dun sa early warning natin. So meron tayong binibigay na warning signal para po doon sa NDRMC. And ito na rin po, sabi nga po natin, ang DICT po, gagawa na rin po sila together with the Department of Science and Technology. So sila naman po yung nasa-assign po para dito. So they're doing this. Hindi man po kaya ng ating local government unit. Hindi nga lang po siguro maibibigay sa lahat ng LGU kasi ang alam ko yung pang para sa lahat is titingnan nila but meron lang na parang isa-pilot kung paano muna siya din saka siya ibibigay ng full para sa lahat ng ating mga local government. Salamat po.
Okay. Thank you po, Director Susan. Yun lang po yung sa list of questions natin. Pero baka yung mayors po natin here, baka may mga katanungan po kayo. Now is the chance po. Okay. Mayor Joseph.
Magandang hapon po, Director.
Magandang hapon po, Mayor. Magandang hapon po.
Okay. Lahat po ng program ng National Disaster Risk Management, na-include na natin lahat ng natural disasters. Pero pwede po ba nating isama sa mga, i-consider na natin na national disaster ay ang problema ng ating overpopulation? Ang atin pong resources, nauubos lahat ng gobyerno purely because dumarami po ng dumarami ang ating populasyon. If you'll notice, pag minanage po natin ang aming mga LGUs, palaging dumarating sa amin ay nandami, overcrowded po ang lahat ng aming mga facilities, lahat po ng resources. But I do not see any program on the part of the national government when it comes to overpopulation. Pwede po ba nating isama natin ito during one of your discussions? Maybe it can. Hindi po ba? This is just an idea. Kasi local leaders, yung mga local chief executives, keeps on thinking how to manage their LGUs to the best of what they have, resources that they have, everything. But kahuli-hulihan, it boils down to hindi kaya ng aming pondo purely because ang dami, ang magnitude ng taong i-manage namin ay napakarami. There are a lot of babies that are coming up. Ano ba ang program ng ating national government? Isama na po natin ito sa disaster. Maraming salamat po.
Tama po kayo, Mayor. Actually nga po, ang isa po sa napag-usapan po para po dito sa National Action Plan for COVID po is to decentralize. Yung pong mabawasan po yung nandun sa mga syudad. Kaya po nagkaroon nga po ng programa na balik probinsya. Kasi nga po overly populated na po ang ating mga syudad. Kaya po nagkaroon ng programa na balik probinsya para po sa ganun, na-decongest yung ating mga cities na meron po tayo. And tama naman po yung sinabi po ninyo. Actually, hindi lamang po Pilipinas ang may problema when it comes to overly populated country. And ito po ay, sa kaalaman ko po, kasi galing po ako ng Department of Health dati, sa kaalaman ko po ang Department of Health ay meron pong programa para dito. Ito po yung kanilang family planning program. At kung saan ito rin po ang binagiging, isa sa mandato po ng ating Population Commission o yung ating POPCOM. But sige po, ang pagka po nagkaroon po ng, because each of the pillar meron po itong tinatawag na quarterly thematic pillar meeting. So kami po kasi ang nandun sa disaster preparedness, ang capacity building and training service po ang nandun sa disaster preparedness. So pwede po natin na gawin po ito na isa sa mga agenda, ito pong ating how to manage our overly populated country or kung sino man po in the entire Philippines is overly populated. Isama po natin ito at titingnan po natin kung ano po ang sabihin po dito ng ating Department of Health.
Sana po ito ay priority program ng ating national government. Sana po.
Yes po, Mayor. Yes po, Mayor.
Salamat
Isama po namin sa sunod pong agenda. Maraming salamat po. Thank you po.
Salamat.
Thank you, Mayor Joseph and Director Susan. Next one po, si Mayor Hermie.
Hello, good afternoon, Director Susan.
Magandang hapon po, Mayor.
Magkasama tayo sa HEMS under Dr. Banatin Mabila. Ako yung coordinator sa region.
Yes po.
Nagkikita tayo before sa
Yes
DOH. Ma'am, thank you for sharing dito yung sa regarding po yung ginagawa na ng OCD ngayon na NDRMC actually na COVID-19 sensitive na yung mga evacuation centers natin. Ang nagiging problema namin dito, Director, of course, may mga malapit po kami mga regional evacuation centers, pero ang design po noon is not integrated dito sa COVID-19 na yung may mga kwan. So, yun po yung may moves po ba ang NDRMC to replan yung mga established na evacuation centers natin ngayon. And number two, gaya ko po na fourth class municipality, wala naman po kaming mga hotels dito na in-expect natin. Pandemic time pa hanggang next year. Kung sakaling pong may surge, ang strategy na po kasi ng probinsya namin, kami na po mag-house ng mga waiting, yung mga naghihintay lang po ng asymptomatic na naghihintay lang po ng results ng swab. Kami na po yung pupuntahan ng mga kababayan namin. Actually, we are encouraged by our provincial government na at least we should have an available 30-bed capacity to absorb kung ano po yung mga LSIs natin, mga OFWs na naghihintay nga lang po ng swab bago ho pauwiin sa mga bahay nila. So yung question ko, Director, before to nung COVID, alam ko po na may mga fundings po naman po tayo na pwedeng i-request for the evacuation center. Paano po yung status ngayon? Nawawala na po ba siya for the meantime dahil po nakapasok lahat sa pandemic response as a whole po yung country natin? So yun po, Director Angwans. Thank you.
Thank you po, Mayor. Thank you po, Mayor. Yes, I remember po yun. Salamat po nakita tayo ulit kahit dito sa ating webinar. Yung po para dun sa evacuation center na yung mga dating design, ito po yung sabi ko po kanina na meron po tayong memorandum for the new design of our evacuation center. Gumagawa po ngayon ng Department of Public Works and Highways, ang ating pong DPWH, ng bagong disenyo po para sa COVID-19 COVID-19 sensitive. And may nakita nga po sila sa amin na design para doon. At yun nga po yung mukha pong yun na ang susunod na gagawin because they have the funding. Ang funding po para sa evacuation centers ay nasa DPWH po. Sila po yung gumagawa po ng mga National Evacuation Center. At mukhang yun na po yung kanilang susundin na design. Kung nandun, ipapakita lang po ulit again to the NDRMC para po sila na-approve na po yun at yun na po yung design. So, ang paggawa po noon ay ng mga bagong evacuation centers na kay DPWH po. Now, doon po sa mga dati ng evacuation centers, ito nga po yung, kasi hindi naman po siya nakalagay para doon. So, sasagutin po natin memorandum paano po yung gagawin doon. In fact, tinanong po namin si DSWD and sa DOH paano na i-redesign itong mga evacuation centers na po. At ito po yung ibibigay po natin sa inyo. Hindi lang yung redesigning ng evacuation center kasi existing na po ito. Hindi na po natin pwedeng dibain ulit ito. But we'll just be making the use out of what we have now. Paano lang na lang siya i-redesign. So yun po. And paano ba siya i-manage na maging COVID-19 na sensitive na po ang lahat ng ito. Now, pagdating po doon sa sinabi mo po, Mayor, kanina na may pondo pa ba para doon na naubos na kasi nakapasok sa COVID-19. Meron pa din po at DPWH para po doon sa pagtayo po ng mga COVID-19 na po. And ito naman po ay nandun pa rin po. Hindi ko nga lang po alam kasi kalimitan po ata ng mga local government units na sabi na ubos na po nila yung kanilang local disaster management fund, yung ating LGUs fund because of our response to COVID-19. At pagdating po, October, mahaba pa yung taon, darating po yung mga disaster, alam po namin na kayo po ay medyo dikit na. Tingnan po natin, meron naman pong NDRM fund na kung saan pwede naman pong humingi ng assistance ng ating pong mga local government units. We just have to give the request to our Office of Civil Defense Regional Offices para po doon. Salamat po, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mayor Hermie. May gusto pa po bang magtanong kay Director Susan? Last call po. Alright, if wala na po, ay may humabol po na can we ask for the presentation? Yes po, may copy po kami ng presentation and we'll send it to your emails po. Alright, if wala na po kayong katanungan, can we ask all of our mayors to turn on their video para makapag-photo op po tayo with our speakers? Oh, ang ganda ng background ni Mayor Orlan. Alright po. Sige po. Ready po? In 3, 2, 1. Isa pa po. 1, 2, 3. Alright, maraming salamat po, Director Susan. If you have extra time po, you're very much welcome to stay until Dr. Grace's talk. Pero kung kailangan niyo na pong umalis, we understand. Maraming salamat po, Direct, for joining us
today. Thank you very much. Thank you. Maraming salamat po. And good afternoon po sa lahat po ng ating mga mayors. Magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat. And please stay COVID-free po. Stay safe po. Salamat po. Thank you.
Thank you very much po again. And now, na laman na po natin how we can localize disaster risk reduction and management, we move on to kaakibat po ng natural disaster, which is seasonal diseases. So our next speaker is a doctor in the field of molecular epidemiology, or those of infectious and tropical diseases. She gained her master's degree in molecular biology and biotechnology at UP Los Baños, while her infectious and tropical diseases doctor's degree was obtained in the prestigious University of London just this 2015. At present, she holds the Research Chair of Epidemiology Group of the UP Los Baños Contra COVID-19 Task Force, where she supervises and coordinates with scientists for the development of proposal on surveillance of COVID-19, which will target the human and potential animal hosts, the virus itself, and the environment. On top of this, our speaker also has several published articles focusing on the key principles of epidemiology. And now, to share with us community mitigation measures for seasonal diseases, let us all welcome Dr. Mary Grace Dacuma.
Thank you for the very nice introduction. I will just share my screen. So, can you see my screen now? Okay.
Yes.
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Ako po si Mary Grace Dacuma. I work at the Animal Biology Division of the Institute of Biological Sciences, University of the Philippines, Los Baños. I'm also a member of the UP COVID-19 Pandemic Response Team. Now, this afternoon, I will be sharing with you my insights on community mitigation measures for seasonal diseases at the time of COVID-19 pandemic. I added this slide because Dr. Maria van Kerkhoff, the technical lead of the WHO Infectious Disease Epidemiology, has a critical statement like asking the question, are we doing enough regularly and repeatedly is very critical. So are we doing enough during this COVID-19 pandemic? Now here's the outline of my talk. I will give you a brief introduction on infectious diseases, and then I will talk about seasonal infectious diseases. Actually, there are plenty, but I'll only focus on the most common infectious diseases in the Philippines that are seasonal, and the mitigating measures, and then the final message. So there are different human and animal pathogens. They can either be parasites, fungi, and bacteria. These are organisms. And there are also, which are not classified as organisms, the viruses. One example of that is the one causing the current COVID-19 pandemic. And there are also prions. This is not even an organism. It has no genetic material. It's an abnormally folded protein. So these are all human and animal pathogens capable of causing diseases. If you wanted to look into problems of infectious disease in your locality, like a municipality or a community, you have to remember that there are actually aspects in infectious diseases. These are major aspects that you have to target. First is the host. So either that's the human host or the animal host. And then there's the pathogen, the one that causes the infection. I already showed you in the earlier slide. It can either be fungus, bacterium, virus, parasite, and even prion. And then infectious disease can happen if there is an interaction between the host and the pathogen in a suitable environment. And there are instances wherein the pathogen requires a vector in order to be transmitted to the host or to infect the host. So you have to consider all these factors when targeting an infectious disease in your locality. Now I added here a table just to show you example for the pathogen. I already mentioned that. The host, that is the one that will develop the disease. Of course, our focus here would be humans. The problem is that there are actual diseases that can be transmitted from animals to humans. We call that zoonotic diseases. And then the environment, either the urbanized area, a rural area, a forest, And then there are also intrinsic factors affecting the environment and then vectors. And in our country, the most common vector are the mosquitoes. Now look at this one. How can a pathogen enter your susceptible community? Remember before, we don't even have a COVID in the community and suddenly it enters. The A population is said to be susceptible if no one has been exposed yet to that particular pathogen, meaning no one has developed an antibody and everybody is susceptible for that particular pathogen. Now, here comes an index case. This is the host carrying the pathogen. If this index case enters the susceptible population, you can imagine the havoc it can create. It can infect everyone because everyone is susceptible to the disease. Look at this one. This is what we call the basic reproduction number. So imagine this as the index case, the one that colored red. And the basic reproduction number, or R naught, here in this particular disease would be 2, which means that this person can infect 2 persons in the course of infection. So imagine this. If each of these 2 are infected, they will again infect 2 persons, and then each of these will again infect 2 persons, and the transmission of the disease will continue unless you do something to stop transmission. If there is nothing that is done to stop transmission, then everybody in the community or in the locality will be infected with the disease. Now, what happens during outbreaks? We always hear these outbreaks, epidemics. So when we talk about outbreak, it means that there is an occurrence in a community or region of a group of illness of similar nature, and they are in excess of normal expectancy. So if we expect 0, if there is 1, that's already an outbreak, or 2, that would be an outbreak. So if it spreads to different countries, then we call that a pandemic. Now let us look at seasonal infectious diseases, which is the core of my talk. The common seasonal infectious diseases in the Philippines can actually be classified as vector-borne infections, food and water-borne infections, and viral infections. And there has to be mitigating measures for this. We already have a problem with COVID-19. We want to reduce the transmission. We want to put a halt to the increasing number of cases, but we cannot stop. The seasonal diseases will always be there and will continue, so we shouldn't stop any mitigating measure for this particular seasonal infectious diseases. So when we do mitigating measures in a local community, we have to designate a responsible authority. There should be sufficient documentation and implementation and monitoring of measures. These are very important so that you will know whether your program is actually effective. There should be data that you can present to the community. And there should be proper monitoring so that you will know the extent of the spread of the disease in the population. Remember, in the population, there are vulnerable people like the pregnant women, the elderly, those with comorbidities, and even very young kids. So we have to be responsible in monitoring the spread of infectious diseases. Now, the timing of implementation is very important. And as well as the details of different phases of the implementation, you have to discuss these with your constituents, how you will start, how you will maintain, and eventually when will you stop the implementation of these mitigating measures. So these are actually crucial factors when implementing mitigating measures for infectious diseases. Now, local government unit-based approaches must go hand in hand with educational initiatives. So we must not alienate the very people that we protect. So this is very important. We have to educate the people in our community in a language that they can understand, because if people understand the disease, the actual threat of this disease to their life and the lives of their family, friends, then they would be able to participate well in that particular mitigating measure. People actually fear something that they do not understand, but people would gladly help and support any mitigating measure if they really understand the extent of this threat to the community. Now, here are the different modes of transmission of infectious diseases. So they're actually abiotic environmental factors like wind and water, so it can actually spread the disease. Animal vectors like mosquitoes and plague. And then Human to human transmission, this is the one that we are scared about, the direct contact. In direct contact, if we start touching surfaces, and then in contaminated surfaces, and then we touch our mouth, our nose, our eyes, so those are actually portals of entry of the disease into the body, and then droplets when somebody just, coughs, sneezes. And could you imagine, even simple breathing can actually release all those particulate matters that can be inhaled by any person that is very close to the one carrying the pathogen. So it can also be airborne. And then there are diseases that can be transmitted through fecal oral route, which means that an infectious pathogen or the infectious form of the disease is released out in the feces. However, that is taken into the mouth. So I will actually show you some forms of seasonal diseases that can be transmitted through fecal oral route. Now look at this one. These are actually several aspects for the prevention and control of seasonal infectious diseases. Um, of course, there is a pathogen that will infect the host, and then it can develop inside the host and infect further hosts. And there are actually pathogens that will require vector, and this vector, it's actually either important in the development of the pathogen, and it can even be transmitted to a reservoir. So these are actually avenues for control of seasonal infectious diseases. Example, the use of vaccines, drugs, and then vaccines to prevent transmission, actually looking into the reservoir, and of course, the key here is sanitation, hygiene, and education of the population. I will have examples of these in the succeeding slides. Now look at this one. So what about for mitigating vector-borne diseases? Please take note that integrated vector management is about better decision making. So the manager for vector control has to work together with managers of agriculture, health, water resources, and land use so that they can work together and systematically design and periodically update their action plans. And this is very important so that their targeted control efforts would be cost effective and there would be less distraction on the very ecosystem that the community is present. I'll give you a classic example. Dengue fever is endemic to the Philippines. However, there are instances wherein it would reach epidemic proportions, and that actually happened in 2019. So this is a simple illustration how this dengue fever is actually transmitted in a population. It starts with the bite of a female Aedes mosquito. It really loves biting at daytime. And then a person can get sick of this. And if this sick person is again bitten by the mosquito, then the dengue virus will be transmitted next to the other susceptible people. As of the moment, there are actually four serotypes of dengue, but there's another one, the fifth serotype. If a person is infected with one serotype, that will provide immunity. The problem is if the person is again infected by a different serotype, and that will increase the risk of hemorrhagic fever on this particular person. So in 2019, the Philippines actually suffered from a dengue epidemic. It actually reached an epidemic proportions last year. So it was really a big problem. And how do we control that? We are all very familiar with this one, the use of chemical control of dengue mosquitoes. So the use of these chemicals to spraying in areas wherein there are dengue outbreaks is designed to cull a large proportion or a large number of mosquitoes carrying dengue. The other is environmental management of dengue mosquito populations. So here we teach the population to please remove all open containers that may contain water and then that may allow the mosquito to lay. There's also what we call biological control of dengue mosquito population, like the use of these Gambusia affinis, even goldfish. They actually eat larvae of these mosquitoes, and if they are placed in open ponds, those things, it can actually help in the control of the mosquito population. Now, educating the people. There's also a need to educate the people as a mitigating measure for dengue. So there has to be personal actions to reduce contact with mosquitoes. We Filipinos love siesta time, like napping in the afternoon. So there has to be they have to lie inside a mosquito net, usually an insecticide treated mosquito net or just a plain mosquito net, to ensure that they would be protected. And on top of that, they can put screen on their doors, on their windows, to prevent entry of mosquitoes. And in others, they would promote the use of mosquito ovic traps. It's actually a trap for mosquitoes. So there is that wire mesh here. It looks favorable. It's very attractive for mosquitoes to lay their eggs. The eggs will actually fall here, and then they will develop on all the stages. And when they become adult, they cannot go out because of a very small opening here of the wire mesh. So it's actually a trap. So that's for dengue. Now, another problem is malaria. While there are higher deaths of dengue in our country compared to malaria, malaria remains endemic in our country. It has been a problem like years ago, but now our country has successfully reduced the number of malaria cases, but there are still some provinces that are endemic to malaria. One of these would be Palawan, Sultan Kudarat, Sulu, and I think Mindoro. So there are actually 5 species of Plasmodium causing malaria. And now, this is actually transmitted by the female Anopheles mosquito. Unlike the mosquito transmitting dengue, this one loves dusk, and then during nighttime and before the sun rises. So it's always the female that is biting, and it actually bites at night. And the problem with this malaria parasite is that if it's present in a person, there are actually species wherein they would stay in the body of the person. They will remain quiescent, and then they will again cause havoc years after or months after. But there are also species wherein if the person is treated, and then it will be removed from the body. The problem now, actually not just in the Philippines, worldwide, there are evolving drug-resistant strains, particularly in Plasmodium falciparum, which is the deadliest form of malaria. And you know that from Palawan, um, scientists from RITM already identified a zoonotic form of malaria, meaning it has been transmitted from the long-tailed macaque to humans, that's Plasmodium falci, and in other countries it has caused deaths. So how can we do mitigating measures for malaria while we are thinking about COVID? There actually the local government unit can actually think of infrastructures like micro irrigation systems that will reduce areas for mosquitoes to increase their population, and then there would be alternating of farming systems, either irrigated or non-irrigated, and then there should be periodic cleanup of riverine vegetation, so they would really love to lay eggs here. And of course, reduction of human vector contact. I already showed you that in dengue we can stop this by napping inside a mosquito net. Now, for prevention of malaria, then the person has to lie down or sleep at night inside an insecticide-treated net. And if you're visiting an area that is endemic for malaria, you have to advise your constituents that they have to put on mosquito repellents. But that is not enough. They have to sleep under insecticide-treated bed nets. And we do this. You're very familiar with these, the indoor residual spraying. So they would spray chemicals inside the walls of the house. It actually stays for 4 months, and when the unfortunate mosquito lands on the wall, the mosquito dies. And the best of all this would be regular screening of the population at risk. Please know that malaria kills. So there should be regular screening of the population at risk, and those identified with malaria must be treated promptly, considering the status of susceptibility or resistance of species of malaria in that particular population. Now let's look at food and waterborne diseases in the Philippines. This is very prevalent, particularly during rainy season. Infectious diarrhea, and actually it's caused by many pathogens, like several forms of bacteria, Salmonella typhi, Escherichia coli, Vibrio cholerae, among others. And then for the parasites, this one that looks like it's smiling, that's Georgia. And then the entamoeba histolytica, the one that causes amoebiasis, and then cryptosporidium, and several viruses, rotavirus, calicivirus, enteric adenovirus, estrovirus, coronaviruses. All of these can cause infectious diarrhea. So let me go through some. Now, the potential sources of food contamination would be raw material handling, and then contact surfaces and packaging materials, and then food preparation and production. So these are potential sources of food contamination in your communities. And imagine this, if there is a source of infection, it's actually transmitted if the person would prepare food. And then if food is actually stored for quite some time, it will allow the bacteria to increase in number. And then if it's distributed to susceptible people, food is eaten, then there's food poisoning, eventually causing infectious diarrhea. So it's very fast. Now, how do we mitigate what are the mitigating measures for foodborne diseases? Of course, in our communities, we have to implement strict quality control. It doesn't mean that there is a COVID-19. We have to be lax in this. No, we have to be very strict because we don't want additional problems. Another is food safety risk assessment. Extensive information campaign. It's always important to engage the community in an extensive information campaign in a language that they can understand. If we use very scientific technical words, the community might not be able to understand that. But if we use their own language, then they would be able to understand what are the threats of these foodborne diseases to their lives and to their community. And then this one is very important. Regular inspection of food products, food processing plants, and food establishments, even those that are, selling foods like street foods and those who are selling online. If they are from your community, you really have to make sure that they really follow all the safety standards in food preparation. Now let's look at waterborne infections. What are the possible sources for this? Poor sanitation, like damages in pipes, ditch, and sewers. Human and animal feces contaminating drinking water. Food prepared with contaminated water. Factory and sewer treatment plants that contaminate groundwater. That is the source of the source of this waterborne infection, and improper garbage disposal. So look at this one. This is the area for waste disposal, and then this would be it actually seeped underground. It contaminated groundwater, and the unfortunate village actually collects their water from this contaminated groundwater, so that the population would just drink contaminated groundwater through their supply wells. Another one is here. This is actually pit latrine. So there is no septic tank. This is very common in barrios or villages. They would just dig on the earth, and then there's no what is that, a septic tank to contain the fecal matter. And look what happens. It actually contaminates the groundwater, which is the source of water in the community. So, given that, then how will this be transmitted? Drinking contaminated water, preparing food and cooking using contaminated water, and then laundry using contaminated water. One which is very prevalent in the Philippines is typhoid fever. This one is infectious. It can actually kill. Um, when I was younger, I have friends and relatives who actually died of typhoid fever. The other is cholera. Now, typhoid fever, by the way, it's caused by Salmonella typhi. It's caused by a bacterium. It's not just caused by contaminated water. It can also be transmitted through contaminated foods, like the food that are not properly cooked. So people can actually get typhoid fever from that. The other one is cholera. This is caused by Vibrio cholerae, and this one is very deadly because if a person is infected with cholera, the problem is that is it can cause rapid dehydration. So it can be very very fatal, and the person can actually die from this. So what are the mitigating measures for waterborne infections? Well, first, vaccination for preventable infection. There's actually a vaccine for typhoid fever, and in the U.S. there's actually a vaccine for cholera. That's a Vaxchora. And then improve sanitation in the community. We still have to inspect our communities if they are following sanitary protocols, and then improve infrastructure for water resources. And you have to regularly monitor the drinking water quality in your communities. I am from Mindanao, and I come from a village in Sarangani province, and people still collect in the hinterlands. People still get water from springs. So they get from spring water. We have to regularly monitor that. Another is promotion of proper hand washing and personal hygiene. So in the community, we have to always reiterate that we always need to wash hands properly, and there should be personal hygiene. And this one, lastly, improve infrastructure for water resources. Now here, I separated this from the food and waterborne infections. Now leptospirosis is actually caused by a bacterium under the genus Leptospira, and it's actually being in contact with water or soil that is contaminated by pee of these infected animals. Either they can be rats, they can be wild animals, or livestock and domestic animals. And in a worst case scenario, they can cause these several damages in the body, like myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscles, meningitis, inflammation of the meninges that is protecting the brain, and many others. This is we are always in danger of potential leptospirosis outbreaks because of flooding in the Philippines during the rainy season. Could you imagine people wading, and there might be rats being there, and these rats might be contaminated or infected with leptospira. So these people would be in danger of acquiring leptospirosis. So here is an example of when there was a leptospirosis outbreak in the Philippines. So what are the mitigating measures for leptospirosis? Treat water for safe drinking. And please tell our communities, don't drink water from flood, river, or swamp. They're always there. I can drink this and then I won't get sick. Please encourage our people to only drink safe water. And then don't walk or swim in flood waters. I actually see people that are very happy. They even swim. The kids, they swim in flood waters. We have to stop that. And then regularly check community animals for infections, particularly stray animals. And when people have to go out because they need to work and yet the streets are flooded, we have to encourage them to wear protective footwear when wading in flood water. Now let's look at this one. Seasonal viral infections. There are actually quite plenty, but I only picked measles, influenza, and the respiratory syncytial virus. Now, measles is a highly contagious disease, and it's very common in children. There is a vaccine for measles, but do you know that we nearly eliminated this disease in 2004? But it made a comeback. I think in 2019, there's a very high number of cases. It's because of the scare of the people in bringing their kids to have vaccination. So there should be information campaign for vaccination. This is actually a preventable disease. There's a vaccine called MMR. So it's a preventable disease. It can be prevented through vaccination. And I already mentioned that this is a highly contagious virus. It can be transmitted by sneezing, coughing, and a very close contact. And imagine this, if a person is infectious, 90% of the people that the person would be in contact with would be infected with measles if they are completely susceptible to this virus. So even just talking can actually transmit the virus, and touching infected surfaces and inhaling contaminated air. Oh, I'm inside an air-conditioned room and you keep on inhaling and somebody there is actually sneezing. The problem is if if you're at work, somebody has measles and then you went home to your kid is not vaccinated yet, but you already had your measles when you were a kid. Imagine the risk that the child can actually get from that transmission. The other is influenza. There are actually different serotypes of influenza, and the most common that actually causes global pandemic is influenza A, and then there's also B. So I think there is a government program with a free influenza vaccination for senior citizens. It actually there the vaccine for influenza actually changes every year because with viruses they love mutating. They really love to mutate. So if you have been infected with influenza in this year, it doesn't mean that the next year you will not be again infected because they really love mutating. Imagine this. This is a transmission of the influenza virus and as well as other respiratory viruses. So if you're very close, like in 1 meter, a large droplet size can actually infect another person. But for a distance, then it would be droplet nuclei, the very small ones. And here's another one, respiratory syncytial virus. Now this one, it actually affects children, usually those who are aged 2 years and less. And well, usually it runs its course without killing the child. The problem is if the child has a prior comorbidities like heart problems or lung problems, it can cause severe complications. So this is another one of those viruses that can be transmitted. It might be misconstrued as a common cold virus, but this one is quite different. So how do we mitigate measures for seasonal viruses? The best is always vaccination. Unfortunately, if I am not mistaken, there's no vaccine yet for respiratory syncytial virus. So please, you have to trust the vaccines, and we have to encourage our community to be very active, particularly the moms, to bring their kids really for the routine vaccination, and then proper hand washing and other good habits, and then covering nose and mouth. I really have to say this. During this COVID-19 pandemic, we have to be very strict in our communities to wear the mask properly. I still see people walking about with the mask covering just their mouth. The nose is actually exposed. And then in others, they would stop for a cigarette smoke on a corner of a street, and then they just put their mask underneath their chin. Maybe that's the reason why the number of cases continue to increase despite the government effort to contain it. So we have to inform our community that there should be they have to follow these minimum health standards, not just for the seasonal viruses but also for COVID-19. So all in all, please take note. There should be health promotion and advocacy, regular monitoring and evaluation of implemented measures, readiness of outbreak and disaster management response. And preparedness is key to preventing and containing an outbreak. Knowledge about the disease is very crucial. You have to disseminate this information to the community in a timely fashion. And then the diagnostic and emergency response teams in your place must be in place. And national and local prevention and control programs must be engaged. After all, we are still in the middle of a pandemic. I actually picked this picture. There's a 98-year-old patient that actually recovered from COVID-19. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Grace. Sa mga may question po, please chat or raise your hand. And for the meantime, I'm going to ask po muna yung submitted questions to us. So, first question po, kapag may symptoms ng COVID-19, protocol na ma-isolate agad at ma-swab test. Minsan, hindi naman COVID pero naka-quarantine dahil may similar symptoms. Anong diseases ang may similar symptoms sa COVID-19 and how do we differentiate them?
Hi, can you still hear me?
Yes po.
Okay. Hi, that's a very nice question. So remember that COVID-19, the virus causing COVID-19 may present as fever, and this is a non-specific sign of the disease. I have already shown you that there are seasonal diseases that can cause fever. The problem is the main focus here is COVID-19 because aside from it's very contagious, it actually kills. That's why we have to isolate the person immediately to rule out COVID-19. Fever is a non-specific sign of viral or bacterial or parasitic infection. But because you presented that, then you have to be, and upon evaluation of the health, what is that, the health community or the health group in your locality, then you have to be isolated first, and then the diagnostic, before you make any decision, you have to rely on the swab test, meaning they would collect the swab and send it to a COVID-19 testing center that will give you the answer whether the person is has COVID-19 or not, and then they can entertain other diseases, because our main problem now is COVID-19. I have read posts, please do not rely on RDTs. So the rapid diagnostic test for presence of antibodies against the virus. The problem with the rapid diagnostic test is that it has very high false negative, which means that in layman's term, it means that it can miss a lot of number of positive people in the population. So always rely your decision on the outcome of the swab test. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. Next naman po, someone is asking, are there reference materials on vaccines that are needed to prevent viruses? Do you have any idea how much they cost?
Oh, actually, vaccines are free. Uh, Vaccines are free for kids in our health centers. So they're actually free, but for those, if you travel out of the Philippines and then the receiving country would require you to have all these vaccines, then you really have to pay. I I I don't have the actual cost of the vaccines now, but they might be expensive. But for endemic diseases in the Philippines, they're actually free in health centers, particularly for kids. Even the health workers would go to mountains, to in hinterlands, to bring vaccines to kids. They really do that, and I really admire that to help among health workers.
Thank you po. Next question po. This is particularly on COVID-19. How long does the virus stay on a surface and be transmitted to an individual? Does it stay longer on metal, wood, etc.?
I am actually not sure how long. Can you give me the email address, and then I will look into that later. But the problem, think about this way: you don't really know when the viral particle lands on that surface. So always be worried when you go out of the house in touching anything, because it might be contaminated surface with the COVID-19, with a virus causing COVID-19. We always have to be worried. That's why when you go out, you always bring disinfectant or 70% alcohol to disinfect your hands. And another thing is that I wanted to say this: always think that every person outside might be a potential person infected with COVID-19.
Thank you po, Dr. Chris. We have some questions here na po in the chat. I'll just read them. From Mayor Flor Esteban, Dengvaxia significantly reduced the incidence of dengue. Will there be any similar vaccines against dengue in the near future?
I hope there will be. I really hope there would be. There was just a problem with the dengue here in our country because of the outcome in the kids that were tested with it. But I hope there will be. So the best means now is really to prevent um, dengue in the community, and the only means of preventing this in the community is stopping mosquitoes from increasing the mosquito carrying the dengue virus.
Next one po from Mayor Marcel Avestruz. How sure can we be that a person, even if positive for COVID-19, after 14 days of being infected is no longer infectious?
Oh my goodness. Thank you for this question, because I'm very frustrated about this. But please take note, this is my own personal opinion. So this is my own personal opinion. It's not the opinion of the institution I'm affiliated with. So this is my personal opinion as a molecular epidemiologist. If a person is quarantined because the person is positive, example, on day one, the person's swab was taken and then it turned out positive, and then the person has to be quarantined for 14 days, something like that. So um, I am hoping that our practice would be at the end of the quarantine period, there would be a post swabbing so that you will really know. Because I have seen in there are actually I will not mention the actual city, but there was a problem wherein the person it's actually an LSI quarantined for 14 days, did not show any signs and symptoms. Actually, in our country, we do not. I think we do not subject them to the swab test after 14 days if they do not show any signs and symptoms. And then this person, well, thinking he has or she has no COVID-19, actually went to pubs, went out drinking, and a few days after, and even visited a nearby municipality, and a few days after, there were symptoms and signs of COVID. And then when the person was swabbed, the person turned out positive. So it's just my opinion, even if they do not present any signs and symptoms at the end of the quarantine period, please, for the sake of your community or municipality or province, please just swab them. Get a swab test so that you will be confident that the one that you are allowing to enter your community is actually not infected with COVID-19.
Thank you, Dr. Case, for clarifying that. Actually po, a lot of our mayors in our first webinar has been asking on the RT-PCR test and dun sa rapid test po. Kaya maybe you can enlighten us more on that.
Yes. Okay. So, example, this is the RT-PCR and this is the RT-PCR and this is the RDT. The RT-PCR detects the virus in the sample. If the virus is present, it means that the person is infected. Now, the RDT, the rapid diagnostic test, detects antibodies against the virus. So it will only tell you exposure to the virus. It will not tell you active infection. There are two forms of antibodies. One is IgM, the other is IgG. The first one that will come out of the body of a person upon exposure to the virus causing COVID-19 would be IgM. This is the first that is detected on the first few days and weeks, but it actually goes down. And the next one that will go up would be IgG. So it will tell you that the exposure has been in the distant past. The problem with using the antibody test is that it will only tell you of the exposure. It will not tell you that there is an active infection. So please do not rely your decisions on antibody tests because there are reports now that there is a very high false negative, meaning they're not actually negative, they're positive, but the antibody just said the antibody test said it's negative. You have to rely your decision on the RT-PCR because the sensitivity is very, very high, the specificity is very, very high. It can discriminate samples that are positive and that are negative. So this is the one that you should rely on when testing for COVID-19. It's always RT-PCR.
Thank you, Doctora. Hold on po, Mayor Mata. I'll just read the next question. This is from Mayor Jasmine Bautista. Doctora, when is the best time to implement fogging or spraying in our barangays before having a dengue case or spraying it when we have one for prevention or response? Please enlighten us on the use of fogging or spraying in the different barangays to prevent and kill dengue mosquitoes.
Actually, if we look at we have to review the season of dengue, the season of dengue in our municipalities. Maybe it would be different across Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So we have to review the past records. Example, for this month of April, dengue cases would start rising. Then maybe before the cases would appear in the population, then you start. That is a preventive measure. But aside from the preventive measure, if you have heard reports that there's already one case of dengue here, then you have to intensify the fogging or the spraying in your barangay. So you have to review records of dengue in your locality. That will really tell you and guide you on policy making related to this implementation of fogging.
Thank you po, Doctora. Now, we have Mayor Matt Mayor. Mayor, can you please unmute po?
Good afternoon, Dr. Grace. Good afternoon po sa aming fellow mayors at sa Kaya Natin. Ang tanong ko po, Dr. Grace, before po, may protocol ang aming provincial government, na before ma-declare ang isang COVID positive, they have to undergo 2 negative na swab results. So ngayon po, just recently, nag-issue yung province namin na isa na lang yung negative result before siya tuluyang ma-declared as recovered patient. So ang sa amin po dito sa LGU, safe na po ba talaga yung isang negative result sa swab test ng isang COVID positive?
I have to ask po, is this a patient that is this a patient confined in a hospital or nasa quarantine facility?
Yun po particularly yung mga nasa not in the hospital. Yung mga nag-isolate lang, mga asymptomatic to mild cases.
Asymptomatic to mild cases. I think this is my opinion po ha. It can be debunked by someone else. Very sensitive po kasi talaga ang RT-PCR. So it's very sensitive. It can really pick the virus and viral particles there. It's also very specific. It can identify which is actually negative. So yung isang test lang po, actually it will suffice to tell you that the individual has no SARS-CoV-2 in the individual's body anymore. Pero yung kaya yun siguro dalawa dati, it's because they just wanted to be, be very, very careful about it. But I have very high confidence in the capacity of the RT-PCR in distinguishing this.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctora.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Matt. And up next, we have Mayor Hermie. Can you please unmute po, Mayor?
Okay. Good afternoon, Dr. Grace, and to all again. I was the municipal health officer before becoming the local chief executive, and I have significant experiences. And thank you for your presentation. You have presented the most common diseases that all the mayors are watching in their communities. Last July 28, I was a member of the panel by the Forest Development Council, wherein, of course, scientist Dr. Rex, the former Chancellor, Dr. Rex Cruz, presented about the integrated area land use planning and development to minimize health risks. So he clearly explained that because of urbanization, the illegal forest, the diseases that are being carried by vectors, I mean animals, inhabit the human population. Likewise, because of scarce spaces for housing, the people also go uplands, our mountains, invading forests, wherein doon po yung nanggagaling ng karamihan ng sakit. So we know about this already. So I had a chance when I was the municipal health officer that we were doing some surveying of larvae because of our rural sanitation officer knows how to recognize which particular larva of mosquito, and because of that, it became a very good tool for me to become proactive before the rainy season because of that dengue and everything. So I think for the benefit of my fellow mayors here, my question would be, do you have in your UP Los Baños or your organization already a map of what particular emerging or re-emerging diseases are being found out in our particular places? Of course, in the north, in La Union particularly, we don't have much of the filariasis. I think it's more of the Visayas area, so we don't have that problem. And otherwise, some provinces have different peculiarities in terms of diseases. So I think it would help us, the local executives, if we have already a ready spot map what particular diseases would be expected to emerge or come out in the next few years. And of course, I always like the red flags. What can you capacitate the community? How to monitor these things so that because when a community gets sick because of an outbreak and everything, it's so hard for the budget, especially for the low income municipalities, and we don't like to go on that. So my direction now is if we have already those available, or is it already an established tool in your organization, ma'am? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Actually, the UP Las Baños is more focused on agriculture, but I think the DOH already identified areas that are endemic. Example, endemic for malaria, and then which urban areas would have this example dengue outbreaks of these particular diseases. I'll actually tell you I'll actually tell you a story, and this is for the benefit of all the mayors present here. The SARS-CoV-2, it was suggested it actually originated from bats. So, and then because of that, based on what you mentioned earlier, that because of urbanization, we actually disrupted their ecosystems. That's why they move towards areas where there are people. Do you know that in 2014 there was actually a zoonotic disease that was reported in Mindanao that killed people? It's a good thing that it did not spread out. That's Henipa virus. We don't even have the capacity to identify the virus. The sample has to be sent out to Australia. It's like this. Horses got sick, and in a poor community, if horses got sick, they will lose money, so they butcher the horse and then they cook it. So those who butcher the horse died, and that's Henipa virus. It came from bats. The same is true for SARS coronavirus. Scientists are actually suggesting that it came from bats because its genome is actually very close. I think 96% similarity with a particular coronavirus present in bats. So I really hope that for every mayor here in your locality, please also include an environmental protection and management of these example of forested areas. We have to protect these, so that we have to ensure that these diseases that are present in animals will not cross the barrier to humans, because often they are very deadly, and we have now the SARS-CoV-2. It's very deadly. We don't even have a vaccine yet, or a drug yet.
Yeah. Actually, that's the direction, the recommendation of the last panel, that they are encouraging the mayors and the DNR to review the land use plan of every municipality, just to protect the human population, and besides conserve our forests.
Yes, and but we shouldn't be angry at bats. Bats help us with pollution, and it has so they harbor viruses. So they have evolved with these viruses for hundreds of years. That's why they don't get sick. But the problem is that if we are exposed to this virus, we haven't evolved with it. It's not just like a common cold. It can kill us.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Hermie. We have a follow-up question po from Mayor Jasmine Bautista. We have a case here after 14 days of quarantine. She was still positive on the virus. What's the explanation on this? This is an RT-PCR. She was also positive on IgM but very light.
Okay. So let me recap that. The person was tested, and the person was positive for COVID-19 for RT-PCR. After 14 days, the person is still positive. And then the person turned out positive for IgM, but it's very light. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, please take note that there are differences in immune responses of every person. So maybe this person, the one that is positive for COVID-19, that turned out positive for COVID-19, the next 2 weeks was not sufficient for his or her body to eliminate the virus. That's why at the end of the 14 days, the person turned out still positive for RT-PCR, which means that the viral particles are still present in the body. It's a good thing that you tested that person, because could you imagine the disaster if you introduce that into the community? And then the person is positive for IgM. That is correct, because IgM is it's actually immunoglobulin M. So it's a pentamer. It's like, it has 5 sides. That's the first antibody that the body will produce on the first instance that it is exposed to the virus. Eventually, after several weeks and months, then it will be replaced by IgM.
Okay, thank you po. For next question po, this is from Mayor Trina Andres. If positive pa rin sa RT-PCR ng second swab, tapos no symptoms naman na, may nag-advise po kasi sa amin na mag-rapid test na lang, and if IgG positive na daw po, okay na yun. Recovered na remnants ng virus na lang po ang andun, and since matagal na rin ang quarantine niya, what should we do po?
Ang nag-advise po ba is a health professional?
Hello po. Hi po, Dr. Yes po, health professional din po. And parang sabi, ganun na lang po yung gagawin. Kasi nagre-request po ng second swab sana. Ay, yun nga po, nag-positive na siya sa second swab. Tapos, sabi para makita yung recovery, diba nga po yung bagong circular ngayon na okay na after 14 days quarantine na walang symptoms. So, parang ano po ba dapat yung sundin namin? Yung swab or IgG na positive?
So itong person na to, wala siyang symptoms?
Wala na po siyang symptoms.
Pero positive pa rin siya sa RT-PCR?
Opo.
You still have to advise the person to isolate himself because we don't really know if those are just remnants of viral particles or the immune system is just really good in reducing the actual number of the virus. That's my personal opinion. And please do not rely on RDT for your decisions because maganda po sana ang RDT. They're very good. The problem is that I think the current RDT has a problem with sensitivity. It has very low sensitivity. It has a high false negative rate. And kapag example IgG na yung present, well, we don't really know yet if the IgG is protective or not for that particular person. So I would really suggest na, well, I will not debunk the memorandum that you receive, but from my end, I would suggest that to make that para safe yung person and the immediate family and household members, then mag-isolate muna and do again another swab test just to make sure that the person would be negative because you will always be scared that, oh my God, I still have the virus. Ayun po.
Okay po. Sige po. Thank you po. Bali, ang ginawa po kasi namin, in-isolate ko siya ulit ng another 14 days.
Excellent. That's excellent. And then do a swab test at the end.
Ulit kami ng ganong case. Kaya sabi ko baka ano po yung dapat namin sundin.
You actually did well. You actually did well for isolating the person for another 14 days because our immune responses actually vary. Some persons may act immediately, but some persons may be immunocompromised or there are other factors na mabagal lang talaga silang magtanggal ng viral particles in their body. So you did well.
Thank you po.
Thank you, Mayor Trina. Next question po is from Mayor Flor Esteban. How's the incidence of reinfection among COVID cases in the Philippines?
I'm sorry, Mayor. I cannot answer you yet because I don't have the actual data on the reinfection among COVID cases in the Philippines. But I would be happy to look into that. I'm not actually part of the people who look into the data of these COVID-19 cases in the Philippines. But I can direct you to ncov.ph. I will type it here, ncov.ph. So this is actually run by the UP COVID-19 Pandemic Response Team. It will tell you about COVID-19 in all provinces of the Philippines, and you can actually see whether your region's COVID-19 would be the transmission is actually increasing, decreasing, and something like that.
Thank you po, Dr. Grace, for sharing that. Another one po from Mayor Jasmine Bautista. Doctora, can I get your opinion about using rapid RT-PCR testing?
Okay. What do you mean about this rapid RT-PCR? Is this the one that is currently used, or the one that they utilize saliva on? What is that? Is it the rapid test or the RT-PCR, Mayor?
Mayor Jazz?
Hi,
Yes.
Mayor.
So, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Dr. Actually, this is new po. And COVID-19 AG test. So, it's a immunoassay for the qualitative detection of specific nucleoprotein antigens. Opo.
Okay. So if actually detects nucleoprotein antigens, then it actually targets proteins.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't detect the viral RNA because this is an RNA virus. So before we use that for our community or apply that in our community, we have to know whether that is effective, and we have to know its diagnostic performance. Ang titingnan nyo po, always ask this: if pag merong ni-recommend na test sa inyong locality, always ask what is the diagnostic performance. When we say diagnostic performance, you have to know the sensitivity and the specificity, and they have to be very, very high, because with a sensitivity of 80%, you will miss the 20%. Poor people who would fall on the 20%. So there are actually many tests that are evolving and actually coming out, like the saliva test, the pooling of samples, and others. But before you accept that in your community, make sure you ask for the diagnostic performance first.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Mayor Jazz. May iba pa po bang gustong humabol who would like to ask Dr. Grace a question? Alright. If wala na po, maraming salamat po, Dr. Grace.
May tanong po ako, ma'am, pahabol. Okay lang po
Okay
ba?
po. Sige po, go po, Mayor June.
Ay, ma'am. Magandang hapon po. Sorry po. Late po ako pasok. So, baka na-discuss nyo na rin po ito. May tanong lang po ako with regard sa contact po, ma'am. Kung ano yung severity ng contact. Like, for example, may doctor kasi, may patient, yung doctor, ma'am, pulmo doctor, na nag-positive. So, naka-ano naman siya, ano yung tawag? Respirator. Naka-respirator siya, tapos naka-mask. Yung patient niya is naka-face shield din, at saka naka-mask din. Ano po yung, paano po, sabi po ng consultant nila is sa COVID, sa ano ba yun? Sa hospital nila. Tanong po siya sa consultant nila doon, consultant ng COVID siguro. Low risk daw po yung contact nila. Tama po ba yan?
Actually, tama po yun. That's why we are encouraged. Example, we are encouraged to wear the mask and the face shield. Kasi yung mask, it protects the nose and the mouth from entry of viral particles. Yung face shield naman, it actually protects our eyes. So, yung iba nga gumagamit pa ng goggles. Now, for doctors, aside from wearing protective personal equipment, they even wear like respirators. You see, I have so many private students in biology who are now medical doctors, practicing medical doctors, and they even send me photos of while they are on duty. So they have this respirator that actually protects them from any form of viral particle. So, ang crucial lang doon is yung paano disinfect yung sarili nila, and before removing the personal protective equipment and then the respirator. But the risk for the doctor as well as for the patient is very, very low as long as they are wearing the mask and the face shield. It's actually low.
Kasi yung advice po sa kanya is kung low risk, hindi daw siya kailangan mag-quarantine.
Which one?
Yung doctor po.
The doctor
kasi nag-positive yung ano after few days, like 3 days, they found out na COVID positive pala yung patient.
Ano po, actually at least inform yung doctor, so I'm sure that they already tested the doctor, but since the doctor
hindi pa po. Nung nalaman lang po na nag-positive yung patient niya, nag-contact trace po, na-trace po siya.
Doctor. Pero during the contact with the patient, nakasuot naman siya ng respirator and PPE.
Wala siya po naka-PPE, hindi po siya naka-PPE kasi konsulta po yun eh. Consultation. Naka-respirator lang po. Tapos yung
Naka-respirator naman po siya. So it actually blocks out any viral particle kasi yung mga pores doon, yung pore size doon is actually very very small. It excludes viral particles. So talagang very low risk nga po kasi nakasuot siya ng respirator. Pero kung yung typical na nakaganito lang and then may social distancing, meron talagang risk sa doctor. Pero kung nakasuot naman siya ng full respirator, the risk would be very very low.
Okay. Sige po. Last question po, ma'am. Follow-up question po to sa question din po ni Mayor Trina kanina. Totoo po ba, ma'am, na kung asymptomatic ka po, ma'am, after 14 days daw, hindi na contagious yung virus?
Yan po atang nasa memorandum ninyo na kapag asymptomatic after 14 days, you can send them home.
May doktor din kasi pong mayor na dito sa Iloilo na nung nag-meeting po kami kay Go, na mention niya po na pero ano siya, ano lang po, GP lang po, general practitioner lang po. Sabi niya po na wala daw virus na nagsistay for more than 21 days. Parang ganun. Namamatay, pag wala ka daw symptoms, na parang namamatay lang daw yung virus sa katawan mo.
Well, that is what we know now, pero we don't have evidence yet that they don't stay longer. So hindi pwede nating i-generalize lahat ng virus ay hindi nagsistay sa body kasi example HIV. The one causing
Yes,
HIV,
yes.
di ba, nagsistay, and hepatitis, it actually stays in the body. So, ang opinion ko lang po ito I don't want to go against the government, pero sa point of view ko po, yung asymptomatic, after 14 days, asymptomatic pa rin, pero dapat pa rin kasing ititest siya
I-test
para
talaga. Actually,
malaman kung positive ba siya or wala ng virus. So, yun po yung point of view ko as a scientist. Maybe the government has a different point of view because of the cost of this test. Pero sa point of view ko po, after 14 days, dapat i-test pa ulit. It's like a post quarantine test. Yun po yung point of view ko.
Actually po, yan naman din po yung ginagawa namin dito po, na tinitest talaga hanggang maging negative na PCR test.
Excellent. Thank
Hindi
you so much.
hindi kami nagpapalabas ng asymptomatic sa facility pag hindi pa siya Kaya lang po, baka po makasuhan din ako dahil doon sa advisory ng DOH or whatever. Or baka mareklamo kasi pinupost talaga ng PHO namin at saka regional DOH namin na after, like for example, dahil medyo overwhelmed yung mga machines namin dito, after 14 days nang dumating yung LSI namin at ROFW, even without the result of the test, i-release na. Mahirap kasi pag i-release mo, kasi mas lalaki yung problema mo. Kasi pag mag-positive yun, mag-contact trace ka na naman, mag-lockdown ka ng community kung saan ka nakatira, mga ganyan.
Your people are very lucky.
So medyo timing lang tong seminar, kaya lang medyo na-late lang po ako, ma'am, kasi galing po ako sa isang meeting din. So at least, ma'am, pwede ko po ba i-quote kayo? Dahil timing lang to, dahil next week po, may General Assembly po ako eh. Nagpatawag po ako.
You can actually get my email po from Winona, so we can exchange emails.
Ayun, ayos. Sige po. Thank you po, ma'am.
And your constituents are very lucky for your effort in protecting them from spreading the virus.
Kaya nga mag-General Assembly po ako, ma'am, para tatanungin ko na lang mga tao ko kung ano ba talaga yung gusto nilang protocol na gagawin namin. Susundin ba namin yung DOH o gawin pa rin namin yung ginagawa namin ngayon? Yun.
That would be on the legal side, right?
Sige po. Salamat po, ma'am. Thank you po.
Alright. Thank you po, Mayor June. And sabi po ni Mayor Riza and Mayor Jazz, they agree with Dr. Grace daw po na mag-test ulit after 14 days kahit asymptomatic. So, on that note,
wait, Winona, that is my opinion ha. I'm not going against the DOH, but that is my opinion from my point of view. So, opinion ko po 'yon.
Yes po. Okay, thank you po for clarifying that, Dr. Grace. Sa ating mga mayors po na may additional questions, we can connect you with Dr. Grace. She's very much willing to answer all of your inquiries po and ask for her opinion on these concerns. And pwede po ba tayo mag-request for our mayors again to open their video para makapag-photo op po tayo. Right. Ready po? 1, 2, 3. Okay po, once again, maraming salamat po, Dr. Grace, for
Thank you,
being here
everyone.
with us. Thank you po. Stay safe po and healthy. And before we end, since napapag-usapan na rin po at natatanong nyo ang mga vaccines, we at Kaya Natin would like to propose a project on vaccines. So I would like to call on Mr. Harvike to briefly discuss this.
Hi. Thank you again to Dr. Grace for the time and for the clarifications this afternoon. I'm very happy that we had her because ako rin nagkaroon ako ng dengue way back in 2006, and I was actually a dengue survivor. I had to nasalinan ako ng 4 bags of platelets. Ganun kagrabe yung dengue ko noon, no? So I was very lucky to be able to have a second life, so to speak. So thank you very much, Dr. Grace. Talagang hindi natin pwedeng, mayors, hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na porket COVID-19 yun lang yung magiging focus natin. Dahil yun nga, as the rainy season comes, there are a lot of other diseases that will come in. Okay, so given that scenario, so I think napag-uusapan na rin yung sige, Mayor Joseph, magpapagupit na po. So, given that scenario, we are currently trying to see how we can work with mayors on how to bring a COVID-19 vaccine to all of you once it has passed the clinical trials. Hindi naman tayo pwede magdala ng vaccine dito na hindi pumapasa ng clinical trials. The sad reality is, I think, if nababasa nyo naman sa news yon, many countries have already ordered and reserved vaccines for them. I think the US, Europe, Japan, big countries have already started ordering and paying pharmaceutical companies for vaccines. No? So if we don't act fast, yung vaccine na lalabas siguro optimistically by the end of the year to first quarter of next year, probably the Filipinos will receive it baka latter part of 2021 pa. Dahil nga sa haba ng pila. No? So, fortunately, private sector groups have already started to talk to manufacturers of these vaccines. No? And they've started dialogues with them to try to bring in vaccines to the Philippines. One such group that we approached us recently and said that they're already in touch with manufacturers of these vaccines, but they don't want to deal with DOH, primarily because of ang tagal ng DOH mag-decide, ang tagal ng bureaucracia. So they wanted to present the idea of purchasing vaccines directly to the mayors. We feel that this is a good opportunity, primarily because if we wait for DOH to act, mapag-iiwanan talaga tayo. And I think you mayors know that in your own experience right now of trying to contain the virus. So si Winona and I will set up a meeting with this group with only the LEAP, Kaya Natin and Jesse Robredo Foundation local officials. You cannot invite more, primarily because the private sector group that we're talking to, hindi rin mahaba yung PC nila. Procuring vaccines and reserving it costs billions of pesos, especially this COVID-19 vaccine. So they will present the manufacturers that they are talking to all of you, including the pharmaceutical companies that are presently doing the clinical trials. They will also present the progress that these pharmaceutical companies have in terms of the clinical trials. And then after that, they will present as well the proposal of these vaccine manufacturing companies to us. No? Ang usapan namin ng group na to, they will present to the mayors. And then if there are mayors who are interested to procure the vaccines or to reserve, we can link you up directly with them para kayo na makipag-usap, including your city health or municipal health officers. The assurance that we have is that all of these vaccines should pass clinical trials at hindi yung parang nilabas ni Putin na wala, in-skip yung phase 1, phase 2 at phase 3, di ba? So we will not do that. So we will just make sure that we get vaccines that are clinically safe and that are tested already. Pero wala tayong magagawa. Kailangan tayo pumili na ngayon. Medyo nasa huli na tayo eh. If we don't act, if we wait for national government to act, ito nangyayari sa bansa natin. I think alam nyo naman yun, mayors, di ba? So with that, the meeting will be in mid-September. Winona will invite all of you. You cannot bring other mayors with you to this meeting. So unlike in the LEAP events, you can bring, di ba? Pero in this meeting, you cannot because it has to be limited to only a few mayors. And then based on that, if the capacity of the partner is filled up, we cannot accommodate more. So we're looking at only procuring 1 million to 1.5 million vaccines. So that's the only capacity right now. That the company that's helping us with this only wants the LGUs to purchase primarily for your frontliners, meaning your doctors, your nurses, your police, those that are high risk, your senior citizens, those with comorbidities. So you cannot procure the vaccine for everyone. So meaning the priority should be first the frontliners and those that are high risk and those with comorbidities. So yun lang yung magiging priority natin. You can ask them questions by the time that the meeting happens. We hope that we will be able to order the vaccines by the second week of October. By that time, the phase 3 clinical trials would have been winding up already. And if everything goes well, we can have the vaccines by the first quarter of 2021. But if we don't act now, we'll probably have the vaccines by the last quarter of 2021. So tatagal pa tong pandemic sa Pilipinas. So that's the part that we'd like to share with you, a progress that Kaya Natin has made. We hope that we can have more progress. We're trying also to work with other groups in terms of trying to bring down the cost of what Dr. Grace said, the RT-PCR tests. And we're talking to groups right now about tests being done in Korea and Singapore that can release the results within 10 to 30 minutes only. So these are being done already in Singapore and Korea. We're already in touch with them. Just to tell you, they will also present to Vice President Robredo this coming week. Once it's okay, we will also present to the mayors with that option. So there are a lot of progress that's happening with regard to mass testing and hopefully with regard to the vaccine. And but definitely from our end in Kaya Natin, once we have this information ready, we will immediately feed them to you and we will immediately call you for a meeting so that we can all get out of this rut together. So that's the update. I hope that you're happy with that and feeling hopeful. Yun.
Thank you, Sir Harvey. And nag-chat nga po sila na this is very, very good news for us. So rest assured po, we will update you on the schedule. And magkikita po ulit tayo in the next 2 weeks for another LEAP webinar. Again, thank you, Dr. Grace and Director Susan for joining us today. Thank you as well to all our LEAP mayors. This has been Leaders for Excellence and Public Service webinar series. Salamat po sa inyong lahat and see you all soon.